Greetings, companions. Today I present an intriguing narrative for your perusal. Now shall we proceed? My wife picked up a wine glass, mimicking a microphone, and chuckled into it, saying, "Each gentleman here has a history with me." The backyard fell silent. Moments ago, the air was filled with music, children playing on the lawn, and the tantalizing aroma of barbecue wafting over the fence. Suddenly, the music stopped, vanishing so thoroughly it seemed as if the very atmosphere had been sliced. Laughter ceased abruptly, dialogues paused. Even the youngsters slowed down, sensing an unease in the air. She stood in the center of the patio, glass lifted, smiling as if she just cracked a joke. She waited for applause, laughter, or someone to transform it into a jest. However, no one did. I remained by the grill and observed the men she'd just addressed. One looked down at his shoes. Another swiftly checked his phone, trembling slightly. One slightly adjusted his posture, much like someone attempting to vanish without an action. No one chuckled. No one contradicted her. No one called out my name. The crowd became restless. A neighbor carried their child towards the exit. Someone made a throat-clearing sound too abruptly. The quietude deepened, heavy and public, and there was no longer any pretense that this was innocent. She eventually looked at me, still clutching her glass, still smiling, expecting me to lighten the mood, switch topics, salvage the celebration she had just ignited in my home. I didn't remove the glass from her grasp. I remained silent. I allowed everyone to remain in the discomfort of what she had publicly admitted in my presence, among my family, among men who suddenly found no shelter. I stayed put near the grill. I merely turned my gaze towards the first man she mentioned within that phrase. He was standing by the refrigerator, a beer dangling unnoticed in his hand. For years, we had shared professional ventures and personal milestones, including celebrating holidays in this very yard, discussing topics as varied as school choices and mortgage details. Yet on that particular occasion, when our gazes met, there was no headshake, no smile, no spoken words. Instead, he turned his gaze away, moving deliberately, as if ignoring my presence seemed safer than blatant falsehoods. I readjusted my stance and focused on the second individual. He had been enjoying a laugh against the fence just moments prior. Now his shoulders were rigid, his jaw clenched. From his pocket, he retrieved his phone, vigorously tapping its screen as if an immediate emergency had arisen there. However, the screen remained unlit. Despite this, he persisted in staring at it, completely avoiding my visual field. The third individual did not even attempt to disguise his discomfort. He stood motionless, hands folded in front of him, eyes fixed on something beyond me, as if the house behind me had become the most captivating spectacle in existence. Approaching nearer, he gulped audibly and modified his stance, subtly distancing himself without departing. Not a single voice challenged its veracity. No one scoffed it away. No one interceded to deny her claims. No jests were made. The gathering gradually disintegrated. Talk subsided. Individuals sought excuses to relocate, pick up items, or inspect children who required no supervision. Chairs whispered against the concrete floor. The door was intentionally left ajar wider than necessary. I remained stationary, observing the men who apparently had shared intimate moments with my spouse within this dwelling. It then became evident that this wasn't an isolated incident but a recurring pattern within this home. I moved away from the barbecue pit and advanced towards the center of the courtyard. I didn't shout or applaud. I didn't signal. I avoided eye contact with my spouse. Instead, I gazed beyond her, at the crowd that seemed uncertain where to direct their gaze. I declared the party was concluded without a speech. For a brief moment, no one stirred, as if waiting for someone to correct an unspoken mistake. Then chairs began to collapse and someone reached for a bag. Parents summoned their children near, whispering urgently. The backyard dispersed politely yet awkwardly, resembling how people depart when they wish to avoid what's upcoming. I walked directly towards the three men without touching them or voicing any accusations. Instead, I gestured towards the gate and began walking away. One by one, they followed obediently, remaining quiet, giving the impression that they understood this was not a conversation but an action. Upon reaching the gate, I opened it wide and held it open until all three had stepped onto the sidewalk. None of them glanced back. I shut the gate and secured its latch. The yard was nearly deserted now, with paper plates still scattered on tables, silent music speakers standing at attention, and a lingering aroma of charred coals in the air. Turning to my wife, I found her still holding a glass. Her smile gradually fading, confusion taking its place instead. Onlookers were present from the sidelines, feigning disinterest. I informed her clearly and calmly that she was gathering a bag. The statement struck harder than anything she'd spoken into that glass vessel. She chuckled once, sharp and forced, as if anticipating support from someone. None came. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't argue. I simply stood there, waiting. She set down the glass too forcefully on the table, causing wine to spill over the edge, and looked around the yard as if the event was happening to her, not because of her actions. The last guest exited through the gate. The party vanished. Only the remnants remained. She didn't immediately go upstairs. Instead, she lingered in the yard, walking between empty tables, her heels clicking against the wine-stained concrete. She claimed I had humiliated her. She claimed I'd intentionally orchestrated this. She claimed I was seeking to appear dominant in front of people who held no significance. I remained silent. With my phone in hand, I summoned my brother within the house without providing an explanation. After finishing my sentence, he indicated he was already en route. Upon returning outdoors, she had withdrawn indoors at last. Upstairs, drawers echoed as they opened and closed briskly, accompanied by the sound of hanging clothes rattling and a suitcase scraping across the wooden floor. Her actions suggested not a departure, but a rehearsal for a performance. She descended the staircase with a bag slung over her shoulder, continuing to accuse and argue as if the night could be altered. Her monologue ceased only upon spotting my brother enter through the front door. He remained silent, standing beside me, taking in the empty yard, the tranquil house, and the bag she clutched. She shifted her gaze from him to me, her words softening, her demeanor changing. She contended that this was uncalled for, suggested a conversation for another time, and promised tomorrow would present a different image. No one spoke in response. She strolled toward us, nearing the door, pausing briefly, seemingly expecting some form of hindrance or guidance. None materialized. My brother collected her luggage and exited with it. She moved along the driveway at a slower pace, her gait unsteady. At the car, she hesitated, then slid in without a backward glance. The engine roared to life, illuminating the facade of the house momentarily. The vehicle pulled away, vanishing down the street. A hush fell over the house, a silence it hadn't known all evening. I secured the door after us. On Monday mornings, I unlocked the office before anyone else appeared. Lights flickered on one by one. The room remained silent, a silence only found before people begin feigning normalcy. I headed straight to my office, draped my coat over the chair, and opened a cabinet I hadn't disturbed in years. In the room were documents I hadn't utilized before, internal reports, resolved complaints that had been handled discreetly, incidents that were filed, reviewed, and concealed due to maintaining business stability being prioritized over revisiting old issues. On my desk, I organized these materials and made copies. By the time the rest of the floor was filling up, I had readied 3 identical folders for each set of documents inside, one path leading to clean results, while the other did not. I arranged a compulsory meeting and sent out invitations without providing an explanation. They arrived one by one, tense and guarded, already aware that the weekend hadn't concluded without incident. No one made light of the situation, no one inquired about my well-being. They took their seats and waited. I placed a folder before each individual. I didn't assign blame, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't refer to my home or family or gatherings. I simply opened one folder enough for them to see the initial page inside. Audit files, compliance problems, acknowledgments they had apparently forgotten. I pushed the folders towards them, instructing them to choose one. Voluntary resignation, effective immediately, or termination due to misconduct, properly recorded and archived. The room remained quiet. One of them reached for the termination folder, his knuckles turning white. He didn't look at me when he agreed to the termination. I nodded once. I took the folder from him, stood up, and headed directly to HR without further discussion. By the time I returned, their access had already been revoked, their corporate card frozen, and their credentials deactivated. I resumed my seat again and faced the remaining 2. The boundary between my personal life and the company was erased. The others didn't protest. One signed the resignation form with a trembling hand. The other studied the folder for a while before doing the same, his pen hovering, pausing, then finally moving. Neither of them glanced up as they shoved the documents towards me. I gathered the folders, rose, and exited the room once more. HR was there, ready. The papers transitioned from my grasp to theirs without ceremony. Phones vibrated across the floor as systems updated. Access points altered. Calendars erased themselves. By midday, their names no longer unlocked doors. I strolled through the office, slowly and deliberately. Keypads flashed red where green had been. A stubborn drawer rejected a code it had accepted for years. The systems reacted as they usually did when authority changed, swiftly and impassively. I assumed control of every account that afternoon. Corporate cards were frozen and reissued. Login credentials were reset. Ongoing approvals were rerouted to my desk. By the end of the day, nothing stirred without my name attached to it. Whispers circulated. People visited my office under the guise of updates and departed without inquiries. Meetings shortened, voices softened. Nothing was said about the gathering. No one spoke of the men who mysteriously disappeared from the organizational chart before midday. Toward the end of the day, my phone pulsed on my desk. My wife's name illuminated the screen. I chose not to pick up. It rang again while I was perusing documents she had no business seeing. Then again as I approved alterations that made the new arrangement official. By the time I departed the office, most of the building was deserted. The light remained behind me, constant and calculated, suggesting nothing out of the ordinary had transpired at all. I secured my office door and exited with the Enterprise now in my control. She started calling before I arrived home. My phone buzzed in the cup holder as I was still parking in the driveway. I ignored it and went inside. The house reeked of stale smoke and chilled food. Discarded plates were piled on the counter. An almost empty wine bottle stood where she'd left it. The phone continued to flash up. I placed my keys, removed my jacket, and traversed the rooms without activating anything. The upstairs bedroom remained undisturbed. Her side of the wardrobe was still packed. No signs of completion were evident. The phone ceased its vibrations. A few minutes elapsed, then headlights illuminated the front windows. She didn't knock initially. Instead, she stood on the porch, shuffling her weight and scrutinizing her phone as if awaiting guidance. Then she rang the bell. I unlocked the door and remained stationary. She hastily spoke, inching closer, saying she had to return indoors. She asserted that she only required the night. She stated we could address everything subsequently, suggesting this encounter didn't have to unfold as it was. I stood motionless. She tried again, her tone now calm. She reiterated her predicament, claiming she had no other shelter. She gazed beyond me into the house, as if it still belonged to her. I retrieved my phone and contacted my brother. I didn't expound, I merely informed him of my location. She fell silent upon hearing his name. We waited on the porch. Vehicles whizzed past. Across the street, a neighbor's garage door creaked open and shut. As my brother arrived, she retreated as if the distance separating us had gained tangibility. She dashed out, nodded briefly, and snatched her bag from beside the entrance. Hesitating, she joined him in the car without any physical contact with me. At the curb, she halted and turned one last time, standing under the porch light. She eyed the house as if committing it to memory. There was silence. The car departed, leaving the street in darkness once more. I locked the door and turned off the lights. For the first time that night, the house fell silent. Not long after, the documents began arriving at work, thick and formal. They accumulated on my desk, unopened until Friday afternoon when my assistant arranged them neatly and left the room. I slowly opened the first envelope. Lawsuits for unjust dismissal, accusations of self-interest, requests for reinstatement or compensation. The names in the documents were recognizable. I didn't contact anyone on that list. Instead, I arranged a meeting for the next day with a lawyer. The attorney arrived early, mature, composed, carrying a worn-out leather briefcase. I pushed the envelopes across the table without commentary. He read them thoroughly, marking pages with a pen, always avoiding eye contact. Upon completion, I handed him internal files, audits, reports, and signed acknowledgments. Everything that predated the event, including my house, was included in these documents. He sorted the papers methodically, separating personal names from business facts with skillful accuracy. When he stood up, he took only the files pertaining to the company. The divorce wasn't mentioned. My spouse wasn't mentioned. The night remained confined to the outdoors, keeping its distance from my room. Subsequent days saw invitations for meetings from past associates, all of which I declined. Correspondence was handled via mediation. Each response was calculated, recorded, and devoid of personal sentiment. At work, routines were readjusted. Previous names on doors gave way to new ones. Agendas filled anew. Tasks progressed without interruption or explanation. No inquiries were made regarding my well-being. None were necessary. The legal proceedings commenced discreetly as planned. I maintained my position. Nothing else overstepped boundaries. A date for the hearing was set for the break of dawn. I arrived prior to the courtroom's opening and took my seat in the second row, my jacket neatly folded beside me. The room filled gradually with soft footsteps and hushed whispers. My attorney perused notes without speaking. Across the aisle, the former partners entered together, their faces tense, their confidence constructed with care. Upon the judge's arrival, the room momentarily stirred before resuming its calm. Procedures were adhered to as each side presented their case. Initially, the opposing party characterized the terminations as retaliatory, emotionally linked to events beyond the workplace. They chose their words carefully, skirting specifics while alluding to the allegation without stating it directly. My attorney then took his place. He didn't resort to shouting and kept references of my personal life minimal. Instead, he presented documents on the table, methodically guiding the court through timelines that predated the incident in question. These included dates, written warnings, and instances of noncompliance, each signed off by relevant parties. Each document was calmly introduced, one after another, until the pile of evidence spoke for itself. The judge listened silently, asking questions and requesting clarifications as needed. When prompted, the former partners provided succinct yet incomplete responses, sometimes contradicting each other unintentionally. A non-existent document was sought. The judge temporarily adjourned, resuming later. The decision was made without fanfare. The terminations were confirmed. The court deemed them appropriate and adequately justified. Requests for rehiring and compensation were rejected. No one audibly reacted. On the opposite side, those who previously loitered in my yard averted their gazes from me. They cautiously collected their documents, moving as if to avoid any sudden attention they could no longer afford. I bid farewell to my lawyer, expressed gratitude, and exited without pause. Outside, the air seemed indifferent. The system had spoken, and it hadn't sided with me. She reappeared weeks afterward in the late afternoon unexpectedly. Her vehicle entered the driveway gradually, as if she questioned her right to be there again. I saw her through the window while concluding work in the living room, the house serene, devoid of superfluous items. Upon opening the door, she retreated a few steps, clasping her hands in front of her gaze weary, her stance cautious. She made no attempt to enter. She stated she hadn't come to argue or resolve anything. Instead, she expressed a desire to apologize. Her words were carefully delivered, as if rehearsed during her drive here. She maintained a distance, creating an emptiness between us that previously didn't exist. I remained silent as she spoke. Once she finished, I merely nodded once and retreated into the house. I returned with a pre-prepared folder and presented it to her. Contained within were divorce documents, appropriately signed, neat and comprehensive. She received the folder with both hands, examining it for a prolonged moment. She didn't sob or object. Instead, she simply held it, then glanced beyond me into the house, noticing what was absent. In a soft voice, she thanked me. I stepped aside to allow her passage back down the path. At the culmination of the driveway, she halted, ascended into her vehicle without glancing back. The dwelling remained motionless. Incrementally, it morphed. Paints were refreshed on the walls, latches were exchanged. The spare room evolved into an office. The yard resumed occupancy, yet only with denizens who didn't cast furtive glances when they encountered me. The enterprise functioned effortlessly. Discussions concluded punctually. No one overstepped boundaries unmerited. That evening, prior to retiring, I traversed the house for the last time. I scrutinized every portal, every panorama, every security measure. Then I extinguished the lamps and activated the alarm, realizing that none within this residence now possessed unrestricted entry by inheritance. Thank you for observing until the end. Express your reflections beneath. I peruse each comment. Don't neglect to subscribe for additional content.